Hi again. In Edwin Scott Gaustad's Rise of Adventism, Chapter 5 is entitled Communitarianism. This is Robert V. Hine taking up the story. Before there were full-blown cults in the 1830s and beyond, there were communities which were separatist in their tendency, and if they never became full-grown cults, they certainly followed the Puritan, you might say, ideology of separatism from a corrupt culture around them. Hine says, what can tell us more about the health and vitality of a people than its vision of the ideal society? What we expect of the future largely determines what we will get. 20th century America has been criticized for its lack of utopian imagination. Who among our political leaders claims a vision of a society substantially and qualitatively better than the one we now have? Well, this is written and published around 1974. The hippie era, of course, had brought about a new thrust in the direction of community or communitarianism. In those days, they were known as communes. And out of that did develop some full-grown cults back in the 70s. Hine goes on, in this connection, critics contend that we have lost our sense of community. At the level of neighborhood or at the level of nation, the values of competitive individualism remain stronger than those of cooperation. If modern America stands so condemned, it may be at least comforting to know that the problem is not new and that its roots and remedies might lie far back in the last century, that is, the beginning of the 19th century. The word community, like communism, is badly overworked, burdened with a bulky baggage of confusing connotation. We should try to keep the deeper meanings clear. Communitarian values elevate the group above the individual and minimize competition between individuals. Motivation becomes the desire to see the total community thrive, the individual flowering from the warm sun of his social environment. The competitive economy brings out the worst in human nature, and a changed environment will restore mankind to its less aggressive, cooperative self. In Christian terms, communitarianism begins with the commandment to love one's neighbor as oneself, and only secondarily to find the individual's relationship with God. Community is an ideal seldom, if ever, realized, and hence, like the Christian life, its achievement must be relative. Furthermore, community never exists without some attention to the development of individuals. All human societies create a tension between the poles of individualism and community. Thus, communitarian ideals are emphases and are not exclusive of such individualistic values as self-reliance. The utopian community is an experiment in the ideals of group living rather than competitive individualism. These experiments have punctuated American history from the moment the Puritans, themselves strong communitarians, stepped ashore. Historians who think of the westward movement in the 19th century as a vast affirmation of the joys of rugged individualism are usually sobered when they learn that the cooperative life was fundamental on the frontier. Daniel Boorstin recently wrote, America grew in the search for community. And again, danger made men travel together and stick together, forming communities as they went. The transient communities of which Boorstin spoke were pragmatic devices to overcome an immediate difficulty, and the booster communities he described were ultimately efforts to maximize individual profit. Nevertheless, they contained elements of community, however superficial, and they may occasionally have led to deeper feelings of cooperative concern. As many as 3/4 of the communitarian experiments of the 19th century took place on the frontier. The more religious among them delighted in referring to Revelation 12, in which the woman with child, Christianity, fled into the wilderness, that is, the American frontier, where God had prepared to save her from the dragon, the evils of European civilization. Thus, religious symbolism could be adapted to the more secular advantages of the West: available land, presumed to be cheap, and isolation from the interference of hostile neighbors. It is time we looked at some specific examples. The Quakers and Oneida we will examine in some detail, look briefly at a variety of others, and then be ready for some concluding observations. Two aspects of community life, work and sex, will be used for purposes of comparison. The story of the Shakers begins, as all good American history should, on another continent. Anne Lee, as a child in Manchester, England, had worked in the textile mills and brooded over the poverty and social evil she witnessed. She became attracted to the ideas of James and Jane Wardley, anti-clerical Quakers who interpreted their times as God's judgment leading to the second coming. Meanwhile, Anne had reluctantly married a good-humored blacksmith, Abraham Stanley. To the union, 4 babies were born, but not in happiness. All of the children died shortly after birth, each time the mother despairing more deeply. The 4th such death sank her into a mental and physical depression which must have been truly awful. Shame and guilt overcame her. She refused food. She shrank from her bed, in her words, as if it had been made of embers. She would wring her hands until blood came from the fingernails. At a point of near exhaustion, Anne Lee experienced a religious conversion. She came to see that sex and lust were the primal sins, and that society's evil could be traced directly to mankind's carnal acts. Marriage and sex were covenants with death and the devil. In celibacy lay salvation. Interestingly enough, one of the social evils Anne Lee felt could be cured by celibacy was that of inequality between the sexes. Anne Lee's revelations were far-ranging. She emerged from them as a Messiah. Through her, the second coming had dawned. Jesus was male and Anne Lee female. Taken together, they were a more complete manifestation of God to mankind. Accepting these revelations, the little group of future Shakers placed Anne Lee in the center. She was henceforth Mother Anne. She now preached with authority the coming kingdom, the celibate way, and the communal life. Proclaimed heretics by the Church of England, the Shakers read Revelation 12 and left their persecutors, their Antichrist, England. Mother Anne and her followers, like the woman in the wilderness, fled to America. The year was 1776. A new sect, a new community, and a new nation were born together. By 1830, Shaker communities in America numbered 18, with a total membership between 5,000 and 6,000, spreading from Maine to Florida and west to Ohio. Each commune numbered 200, divided into families of about 50, a size considered ideal for personal and social development. Growth, remarkable for a celibate philosophy, came from converts. A group of Millerites, for example, followed their disappointment over William Miller's prophecy in 1843, joined the Shakers, who were already and frequently embracing large groups of orphans. When converted families arrived with children, the offspring were taken from the parents and thereafter were allowed only one brief annual reunion. The worldly family was not for partakers of the second coming. The Shakers called the common ownership of goods their united inheritance and firmly believed that only in sharing could one truly manifest love. Oneness with Christ included oneness in all possessions. Inequalities in the outside world only proved society's lack of Christianity. These egalitarian doctrines were the later fruits of Anne Lee's bitter brooding over the evils of poverty in the slums of Manchester. Even the most caustic critics of Shaker doctrine have admitted that its labor system was remarkably fine. Its products, especially flour and vegetable seeds, were widely sought, and its furniture, simple, practical, unerringly beautiful in design and handiwork, commanded a wide market. As the result of consecrated labor, in which religious joy infused all work, the product became a physical manifestation of deep spirituality. Handwork was important in Shaker theory because it made more direct the infused spirituality, but at the same time, the Shakers invented a remarkable number of labor-saving devices for turning broom handles, printing labels, curing leather, and making baskets. They claimed the invention of the screw propeller, the circular saw, an improved clothespin, a pea sheller, and an apple corer. They took particular pains with proper lighting and ventilation in their buildings. But on none of their improvements would they seek patents, for that legal device savored of monopoly and inequality. One worked and invented for one's fellow man, not for oneself. All labor was of value, none, no matter how menial or dirty, was degrading. Nevertheless, the community took pains to rotate work whenever possible. Aptitude was observed, however, and skilled workmen did become foremen and supervisors, though they must in turn on other occasions take their share of the rotating tasks. Regardless of the work done, however, all members of the community received from the family stores the material goods needed, no more and no less. The Marxian maxim applied to Shaker communities more than it has ever applied to socialist ones, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. I'll put in a link to the tract videos from the tract that we did called Slaves of Men. It's 3 connected videos, subtitled Five Characteristics of Cultic Groups. And next time, dealing with John Humphrey Noyes and the Oneida community.